about secret societies, and they don't really come into this discussion much tonight. But we will be talking about crop circles, and we're going to look at various types of evidence. My website is called Check the Evidence, as some of you know, so this is exactly the same approach for this presentation. We'll attempt to gain a better understanding of the crop circle phenomenon. That's the objective. We'll look at the history of crop circles, the evidence for man or woman-made crop circles, evidence for crop circles being made by weather or atmospheric phenomena, evidence for crop circles made by extraterrestrials or other forms of higher consciousness, and I do think that's involved here. Possible meanings of the crop circles, and looking at some crop circle messages. And I think what I would like to say in all of this is that you can get some answers. You can establish some things as being true. And I hope by the end of this presentation you'll have seen the evidence to agree with me. It's not all a total mystery. We can say certain things with a high degree of certainty. Same with 9/11 research. So let's have a look at a brief history of crop formations and find out what that can tell us, if anything. One of the earliest descriptions of crop formations is some drawings of 2 UK crop formations described in 1686 by Professor Robert Plott. And Plott examined multiple such formations and states that the soils under all of them were much looser and drier than ordinary, and the parts interspersed with a white ore, much like that in mouldy bread, of a musty, rancid smell, but to the taste insipid. And this is from a natural history of Staffordshire, dated, as it said earlier, in 1686. Now, there's some references to this story which say that, it was made up, or there's no evidence to suggest that it was ever published, or, the sketches weren't actually attached to the original manuscript, things of this sort. So there's some doubts over this among researchers, but that was one of the earliest references I could find. There's a little bit more on the next slide. Now, this crop formation from the same era, also from a natural history of Staffordshire, occurred in St Giles Fields at University College. And the cloud and trumpet light diagram, which is this thing here, illustrates Plott's hypothesis that crop formations must needs be the effects of lightning exploded from the clouds. So he was saying that lightning exploded from the clouds and made this square within a circle formation, for example. So it does go back quite a long way. And in this case, the clouds breaking first in a quadrangular and after in a wider circular form. So how a cloud would break in a square or quadrangle form, I'm not sure. He didn't really explain that part, but that was his guess at that time. And then, of course, the other picture that's often referenced in the research is this known endeavour that you'll see this sort of everywhere, really. And this comes from 1678, and the pamphlet tells of a farmer who, refusing to pay the price demanded by a labourer to mow his field, swore that he would rather that the devil mowed it instead. According to the pamphlet, that night his field appeared to be in flame. The next morning the field was found to be perfectly mowed, supernaturally perfect in fact. So again, that's going back, over 300 years. Now, we then skip forward to July 1880, and the prestigious journal Nature, volume 22, page 290 to 91, published a letter from British spectroscopist J. Round Kaplan, in which he described his discovery and subsequent examination of multiple circular areas of flattened wheat on a farm in southern England. And he describes of crop forming circular spots with a few standing stalks as a centre, some prostrate stalks with their heads arranged in, pretty evenly in a direction forming a circle round the centre, and outside these a circular wall of stalks which have not suffered. So in other words, it was affected in one area but not in others. Kaplan suggested that these flattened circles were the result of some cyclonic wind action. So again, we're getting a weather explanation. And enclosed a sketch of the most perfect of these circles, but the Nature journal did not publish a sketch apparently, so we don't appear to have a copy of that. And then we'd probably skip forward to this, which is the Tully saucer nest. And in some cases, witnesses reported flattened crops following the landing of a saucer. And this, of course, was a very simplistic explanation given to some of the earlier circles as well in the sort of 50s and 60s, basically after 1947, when the modern UFO era is said to have started. At 9 a.m. on January 19th, 1966, a calm, sunny day, a 28-year-old banana farmer named George Pedley was driving a tractor near Horseshoe Lagoon on the property of Albert Panisi near Tully in tropical North Queensland, Australia. When he was about 25 yards from the lagoon, he heard a loud hissing sound above the noise of the tractor. And a short time after the event, this picture here, the saucer's nest, was found on farmland nearby. So that's literally the result of a supposed flying saucer land or a flying saucer land. And then we again move a bit further forward a few more years, and we move into the 1970s. And folklore and anecdotal evidence suggests that the crop circle history is a long one. And the earliest one, photographed, started in 1966, and these appeared in Australia. Now, I haven't seen any photographs from there. The earliest ones I've got are really from the 1980s. First photographs of crop circles in England were taken in Hampshire in 1978. And more photographic evidence demonstrates worldwide activity with a focus in southern England. I think something like over 80%, maybe even over 90% of all the crop circles in the world have been in southern England. A very high proportion. Now, if you look at this circle here, this is from Colin Andrews' website, and he's tried to analyse the way that this has been made. If you look, the crop has been laid in a spiral, which has its centre in the centre of the circle. And this is from the 31st of July 1985 at Longstock, Hampshire, England. One of 5 found together by Busty Taylor, each with a similar signature. And that's Michael Green's picture from 1985, probably taken, I'm not sure, probably taken from a microlight or a light aircraft or something like that. And then 5th of August 1989, at Winterbower Stoke, near Stonehenge, England, with the signature almost radial. And that was one of Colin Andrews' photographs. We'll talk quite a bit about Colin Andrews, because he's one of the main researchers who's been collecting data for 20 years now, and he's got some very interesting information, very interesting. And I rate him as one of the sort of strongest scientific crop circle researchers, really. He's tried to gather the scientific data. And you see the different dimensions to this phenomenon, really. One is the sort of basic scientific issue as to what's making the circles, but as we'll see, we then start to get into the realms of consciousness and what the meaning is, and whether it is some type of consciousness that's trying to send us a message, and I think there is something in that as well. Now moving again on to some more pictures from the 80s. This is from, let's see, 1972 account. Suddenly I heard a noise. It seemed as if something pushed down the wheat. That night, the air was completely still. I looked around. The moon had just appeared, shining brightly. In front of my eyes, I could see a great imprint taking shape. The wheat was forced down in a clockwise direction, and that's an account by Bryce Bond and Arthur Shuttleworth to the first modern crop circles they were witnesses to the first modern crop circles in Warminster, which, as some of you in this room may know, is another one of these UFO hotspots. A lot of the sightings in the 70s and 80s were in Warminster, and they had all these little tours, and people would go there and spend overnight and camp and look for UFOs. But the crop circles were not really a noted phenomenon until perhaps the mid-1980s. That's when the interest really started to sort of ramp up that bit more. And they've been known to appear in tobacco, wheat, oilseed rape, snow, conifer trees and other areas. So we're not just looking at crops that you grow for cereal crops is basically what we're trying to say. There are non-cereal crops that they've appeared in. And they've been reported in 29 different countries. So it is pretty much a global phenomenon. Now this picture I actually took in 1987. It was about in July, because my brother used to live in Chippenham, which is in Wiltshire. And so I used to go visit him fairly regularly. Now, I wasn't really that interested in it. I just, you can see I took this. I didn't really go down inside it or try and investigate it that much more. But it's interesting looking back at taking that picture and finding out, thinking of where I've got to today with it, which is, you'll see later, it gets pretty wild. And then we get into a kind of change, really, in the 1990s. We had the basic circles in the 1980s with maybe 1 or 2 circles, like you saw on this circle, very simple circle in the middle, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the outside, looks like a pattern that you see on a dice, or something like that. Very simple design. There's obviously the middle one here, something similar, but nothing really that complicated. But then it was in the 1990s that we started to get these pictograms appearing. And it was on the night of July 10th, 1990, the inhabitants of the village of Alton Barnes heard a peculiar buzzing sound which caused all the dogs in the village to bark incessantly throughout the night. As the dawn light bathed the Vale of Pusey, none of the farmers' cars would start, and as they approached their fields, no one could believe their eyes. The 603-foot pictogram lay majestically in the wheat. And we're going to come back to these types of symbols a bit later, but you can see the scale of these has suddenly gone up. I mean, if you look at the people here and see how small they are, and I'll just again flip back to the previous slide, see that person's sort of relatively big, and you can get an impression of how much bigger that formation is. It's a lot bigger. But they've got bigger and more complicated. And this is very interesting, this, I've forgotten about this bit actually, because I put this together several years ago and I've added to it as time's gone on. And just what I'm interested in reading here, none of the farmers' cars would start. What does that remind you of? These UFO encounters? Well, that sort of thing happens. And I think I know what the explanation for that is, at least partly at least. And then what we've got, 1990s to present day, I mean, we've got stuff like this. This is from 2001, and there's analysis of this. This is the Milk Hill Formation. And apparently, if you count all the numbers of circles or the numbers on an arm or something, there's some relationship to 9/11 built into this. This is not a relationship to 9/11 that I was talking to some people about. There is another relationship to 9/11, which I'll come to later, a very strong one actually, as I see things from the evidence. And then we've got this one from Milk Hill in 21st of June 2009. This is not a very good angle on it. The aerial ones are better. But this formation was added to over 3 nights, and it actually got more complicated. There was a bit drawn on down here. I don't think I've had a chance to put a picture into this because there's so many. But they actually added to this over 3 nights, and it got more complicated, which is quite unusual. So now we'll look at some of the characteristics of some of the crop or ring formations that have been found and discovered. We're going to start off with the natural explanation just to make sure we cover all the bases. Okay, you hear this mentioned in a little video clip later on. We're going to look at, just briefly on this slide, about fairy rings. A fairy ring or fairy circle, also known as a pixie ring, is a naturally occurring ring or arc of mushrooms, as you can see here in this picture. The rings may grow over 10 metres in diameter and become stable over time as the fungus grows and seeks food underground. Even if no mushrooms are present, the underground presence of the fungus may sometimes be detected by observing the withering of grass directly above. And I actually saw this on somebody's lawn on our estate last summer. They had a ring like this on their lawn. In English folklore, fairy rings were said to be caused by fairies or pixies dancing in a circle, wearing down the grass beneath their feet. In Scandinavian folklore, these circles were attributed to the elves and were called alvdanser, i.e. elf dancers. So this is where you get the folklore connections. Yeah, quite. Okay. And then non-geometric crop flattening as well. This is something that happens naturally. Non-geometric crop formations. Anomalous plant changes documented in geometric crop formations, which we'll come to shortly. Those in which a recognisable design is apparent are also found in many cases in non-geometrically flattened crop, and this is called lodging by many farmers, and thought to be by them to be a result of intense weather systems impinging on plants already weakened by over-fertilisation. If too much nitrogen is applied to the growing crop, the seed heads grow larger and weigh more, thus making the plant stalk more susceptible to wind and rain. In other words, if you've got a heavier stalk on top of the plant, it's going to fall down and the stalk will become bent or break. Testing of quite a few of these non-geometrically flattened impressions, particularly when they are found in vicinities where geometric formations occur regularly, has in a number of cases revealed the same plantal abnormalities, which again we'll come to, found in geometric events, and to a greater degree in most instances. And again, I think some of this is the effect of the weather system, in some cases at least partly. And you'll see why that is later. And we've got in more geometric crop formations, more expulsion cavities, which again we'll see a slide of this coming up, holes blown out at the plant stem nodes are also usually found. And germination abnormalities are frequently more pronounced. In other words, the way that the crop grows, the seed grows into a crop, that is also changed. And you'll see I've got some slide later on where if you plant the crops, the seeds that have come from plants inside a crop circle, they will grow differently to the ones, the seeds that you plant from outside the crop circle. The evidence seems to indicate more intense heating, possibly microwave energy, and flattening force discharged in these chaotically down crop areas. Remember microwave energy, we'll mention that again later. Laboratory tests on plants taken from non-geometrically downed areas like these in many different countries often reveal the same changes found in plants from crop circles of more geometrically downed. Essentially said that on the last slide. And this is again from Alton Barnes in Wiltshire, or around Wiltshire. I think it's in Wiltshire, but it's basically where all the other crop circles are, in that same area. So yeah, you can see you've got just this, what the picture is trying to show. You've got obviously the circle formations, and then you've got these other areas which seem to have fallen down, and you can see these are pretty random. It just looks like sort of noise. So, you know, we can't say that all the crop has been flattened with this, whatever process has made them. So yeah, this is basically, I'm not going to read all the text out, but we've already had an example of this I briefly mentioned. This crop formation, 1998, you can see that the area has changed 3 weeks later. A bit more gets added to it, and more has fallen down in the field. This sort of revisitation of the energy system involved in creating circles has been seen in all countries studied so far, and it is quite interesting to note that in some cases the revisitation can also produce additional geometric features which seem to complement the original design rather than resulting in randomly downed additions. So we do seem to get this, somebody goes back and adds more to it, which is not often talked about. Okay, so now we're going to look at one particular mechanism which somebody came up with, and I think there is something in this. What we're talking about is electromagnetic energy and possibly microwave energy, but this is one theory. Now, this was given to me by a chap called Omar Fowler, who did a study in the early 90s, not in Wiltshire, actually surprisingly. He did this quite near where I live. I believe it's near Mansfield. I think you'll see it on the next slide. I can't remember off the top of my head. But what they basically had was, they had a crop circle on the side of a hill, and I'm not sure how high this hill was, but they basically measured, with a meter, the EMF field, the electrostatic sort of charge at ground level near where the crop was. And they found that if you raise this thing above 12 feet in the air, with the micrometer, I presume they must have put it onto some type of pole or something, they get a different electrostatic reading above this boundary layer, so closer to the ground. And I think this is electromagnetic, what the R stands for, ground wave. So they're saying that there's basically an electrostatic field close to the ground. That's basically what this is showing. That's what they measured near where this crop circle was formed. And it was deeper here than it was at the top of the hill. And it said that below the boundary layer, the electrostatic readings were off the scale, whichever scale they used. So in other words, they detected an electric field at ground level. That's the summary of that. And they think that what could be generated, or the way that is generated, is through an electrical field that builds up on each of the stalks of the wheat, around the stalks of the wheat. So this diagram shows how a wheat head could build up a charge of static electricity. You know when you take the jumper off and you hear that clicking and you get the, if you do it in the dark, you know your hair sticks up and you get a spark sometimes. If you do it in the dark, sometimes you can see the spark. If you've got a woolly jumper, you can actually see the static electricity spark. And it's not difficult to imagine that when blowing continually in the breeze, aside from the voltage, if you've got this crop brushing against each other, blowing in the breeze, you could potentially on a dry day, or a dry couple of days, you can actually get quite a significant build-up of electrical charge. You know, maybe I don't know, 500,000 volts or something, potentially. So, what about, and this I think is, you'll hear in a clip later on, there's a physicist called Terence Mead who's kind of like wondered if we've got this electrical field on the ground, around the crop, what if there's some type of interaction with the solar wind?